Welcome to another real-world SF-50 flying video. This one is titled the SF-50 G2 Enhanced Takeoff Performance Upgrade. Hello, I'm David Weeks. I've been flying professionally for over 50 years, starting as a CFI, then as a charter pilot in light twins. I spent time as an air ambulance pilot and a Swearingen Metro, and worked as a demonstration pilot for the Learjet factory. I had a 35-year airline career flying the 737-200 and 300, the A320 series, and I retired as a Boeing 787 captain. I'm also a current CFII. I've got over 675 hours in the SF-50, and I'd like to share my SF-50 experiences with you. Now, there may be other YouTube channels that have glitzier production values than this one. I like to spend my time writing and teaching about the SF-50, not doing post-production work, so just imagine this video as like a hangar chat session between friends. First, I do want to state clearly that the procedures in the Cirrus Vision Jet airplane flight manual are always controlling. This video is not flight instruction. The original G1 and many of the early G2 Vision Jets are somewhat lacking in hot and high performance, to put it politely. For a while now, Cirrus has offered G2 owners an upgrade to get better hot and high performance with a new FADEC and fuel control unit. They call it the Enhanced Takeoff Performance Upgrade, and it converts your plain vanilla G2 into a G2 Plus. Now, it's pricey, about $122,000 as of the 2024 pricing. It may be worth it to some, but not to others. And this upgrade is unfortunately not available for G1 Vision Jets. The upgrade itself is not time-consuming. One of my SF-50 friends had it done last year at his Cirrus Service Center, and it took only 2 business days, one for the hardware installation and one more for software updates and testing everything. Now let's take a look at the performance increases that you do and do not get from the Plus upgrade for an older G2. Now, as we all know, the Williams FJ33-5A engine is rated for 1,866 pounds of thrust at sea level and standard temperature of 15 C or 59 Fahrenheit. The engine has no flat rating, so the maximum available thrust can only decrease as the density altitude increases. First, let's compare a G2 and a G2 Plus takeoff at the 6,000-pound max gross takeoff weight at sea level and ISA standard temperature. The distance is over a 50-foot obstacle, which is what Cirrus recommends for the minimum runway length. G2 Non-Plus, 3,192 feet. G2 Plus, 2,815 feet. The Plus has an 11.8% shorter distance to reach 50 feet. Now, I have to say that I don't quite understand this data point. If the Plus engine has the same thrust as a plain vanilla G2 at sea level standard A temperatures, I don't see how the takeoff distance is 11.8% less. Now, sea level, 6,000-pound takeoff weight, and 40 Celsius. G2 Non-Plus, 5,561 feet. By the way, this takeoff distance is 74% more than at sea level and ISA of 15C or 59F. The G2 Plus, only 4,217 feet. The Plus has a 24% shorter distance to reach 50 feet. Now let's go to a 4,000-foot MSL airport, again 6,000-pound takeoff weight and ISA standard temperature. G2 Non-Plus, the plain vanilla, 3,864 feet. The G2 Plus, 3,208 feet. The Plus has a 17% shorter distance to reach 50 feet. Now let's look at the 4,000-foot MSL airport, 6,000-pound takeoff weight, and 30 centigrade or 86 Fahrenheit. The G2 Non-Plus, 6,122 feet. The G2 Plus, 4,697 feet. Here, the Plus has a 23% shorter distance to reach 50 feet. Now, let's go to a 7,000-foot airport, 6,000-pound takeoff weight, and ISA standard temperature. The G2 Non-Plus, the plain vanilla version, 4,321 feet. The G2 Plus, 3,741 feet. The Plus has a 13.4% shorter distance to 50 feet. Now, let's take the same 7,000-foot airport, 6,000-pound max gross takeoff weight, and 40C, which is 104 Fahrenheit. And by the way, my home base airport, Flagstaff, Arizona, is at 7,000 feet MSL, and I've never seen it hotter than 92 degrees. Okay, the G2 Non Plus, the plain vanilla, 10,361 feet. The G2 Plus, 7,794 feet. Again, the Plus has a 25% shorter distance to 50 feet. But wait, there's more, as the TV announcer used to say. For many of my operations at Flagstaff, I have to land using flaps 50% to comply with the minimum go-round configuration for climb grading. And many SF-50 pilots forget this. Now, I cover this in detail in my video, Plan Your Flight and Fly Your Plan. At 7,000 feet, the hottest temperature that I can land at the max landing weight of 5,550 pounds in my plain vanilla non-plus G2 using flaps 100% is 20 Celsius, which is 68 Fahrenheit. Hotter than this, I can't meet the climb gradient requirements, so I have to land flaps 50%. At the same 7,000 feet MSL airport, the Plus can land at max landing weight of 5,550 pounds at 30 C, which is 86 Fahrenheit, and that is significantly hotter. Now, be clear that this does not mean that you can use shorter runways for landing with an Enhanced Takeoff Performance G2 Plus. Both airplanes have the exact same distance for landing distance over a 50-foot obstacle and ground rollout. The extra thrust from the Plus only helps during go-around in this case. Now, since the Plus upgrade provides more power at takeoff thrust, but not at max continuous thrust, the AFM supplement for the Plus provides only a new climb gradient chart for the takeoff configuration. Now, as a reminder, that's takeoff thrust, flaps 50%, landing gear up, and a climb speed of 91 knots indicated. Don't forget, the minimum speed for autopilot engagement with flaps 50% is 95 knots indicated, so you have to hand fly this climb configuration. Now here are some charts comparing the takeoff configuration climb gradients between the plain vanilla G2 and the G2 Plus. Here's a chart showing the climb gradient at 6,000 pounds, sea level, and various ISO temperatures. The plain vanilla G2 and the Plus perform virtually identically until the temperature exceeds ISO plus 10 degrees. Now note that the climb gradients for both versions are identical until the temperature reaches ISO plus 10. Unlike the takeoff distance we discussed earlier, the climb gradients are identical at sea level and ISO or colder. Now let's look at the climb gradient comparison for a 7,000-foot MSL airport. Again, 6,000 pounds and varying ISO temperatures. Again, both flavors of engine provide virtually identical climb gradient performance in cold weather up to ISO. As expected, when the temperature exceeds ISO, the G2 Plus significantly outperforms the plain vanilla G2. Now, we have a few other little tidbits. Let's talk about noise. As far as the ICAO noise numbers listed in Section 1 of the AFM, the Plus clocks in just 1.6 decibels louder for the lateral configuration and about the same for the other two measurements. The overall change for the Plus is 0.4 decibels more for the Stage 4 margin. With respect to runway gradient and headwinds or tailwinds, the Plus upgrade changes performance slightly, and oddly enough, not always for the better. The non-Plus plain vanilla G2 AFM says, for tailwind, add 40% to the ground run and 35% to the total distance for every 10 knots of tailwind. The Plus AFM says, for tailwind, add 44% to the ground run and 39% to the total distance for every 10 knots of tailwind. So this is saying the Plus is more negatively impacted by a tailwind than the plain G2, and I have no explanation for that. Okay, runway gradients. The non-Plus AFM says for a downhill runway gradient, subtract 2% from the ground run for every 1% of downhill gradient. The Plus AFM says for a downhill runway gradient, subtract 5% from the ground run for every 1% of downhill gradient. Here, the Plus does significantly better with a downhill runway. Okay, uphill runway. The non-plus says, uphill gradient. Add 14% to the ground run for every 1% of uphill gradient. The plus AFM says for an uphill gradient, add 15% to the ground run for every 1% of uphill gradient. Here, the plus does a teeny tiny bit worse with an uphill runway. And again, I have no explanation for that. But we need to recognize that these differences in performance here are very small. Changes in distance of 1 or 2% are not worth counting on, in my personal opinion. For example, if you have a ground run of 2,500 feet, a 1% change is 25 feet. Any deviation from perfect pilot technique can easily make this kind of improvement disappear. And one more word to the wise about the runway gradient data. Runway gradients can be a tricky thing. A bowl-shaped runway that has the same elevation at the ends and is low in the middle has a net zero gradient. But it can help you for takeoff if you lift off before the uphill portion. The reverse, which is a runway that's high in the middle with the same elevation at both ends, also has a net zero gradient. But that runway will hurt you for takeoff as you are accelerating uphill. But both runways would be shown as a net zero gradient in the published airport data. Again, speaking personally, I would not use any downhill gradient improvements, but if the runway is uphill, I would take the performance penalty. Now, if you're in the market for the Enhanced Takeoff Performance upgrade, I'm sure that you'll spend time crunching numbers for your specific airports and missions. I did, but I find that I did not really need the boost in takeoff performance as the runway in Flagstaff is 8,800 feet long. Now, if you want to save lots of time and effort and not have to interpolate results from the AFM charts, I strongly recommend using Bob Urschel's Vision ProFlight app. It has all the performance data for both G2 Plus and plain vanilla G2s. In addition, I'd like to thank Bob for creating the charts used in this video. I hope this short discussion of how the Enhanced Takeoff Performance G2 Plus and the plain vanilla G2 compare is helpful for those who may be considering the upgrade and are seeing how much more performance they can get. I'm David Weeks, and thanks for watching this episode of SF50 Real World Flying.